All right, we're close to 10. We'll give it another minute or two. We're doing solitude. Well, kinda. We shall see. Well, we'll see. Make sure I didn't forget something. Well, good morning. We're going to go ahead and start coming to order. I know it's spring break for some families, others not. So, a couple of announcements for us. As for this group, the Tuesday Bible study, this week we're going to look at solitude, the discipline of solitude. Next week, the discipline of submission, the 16th service, 23rd confession, and then our last meeting we'll look at the discipline of worship, which is April the 30th. Historically, we meet off campus, which means we have to have a host. So if you feel like you would like to host, feel free to contact me or Kathy or someone. If not, we'll meet here. But normally on the last meeting, we have like a little luncheon and people just bring like a potluck. So just keep that in mind. April for us, we're ending a couple of weeks early this year, mainly because I have to go to a graduation, so that I'm not going to miss. So, and there's a children's home luncheon I think that many of you are a part of and that I am as well. So just anyway, we're going to end a couple of weeks early on the 30th. It'll be our last meeting. As for general church announcements, or on Wednesday, April the 10th and Wednesday, April the 17th, those are after Wednesday night supper, I'm going to give just some brief updates of what to possibly expect at General Conference this year. The United Methodist Church has their General Conference that'll meet April the 23rd through May the 3rd. And some of the things that are at least resolutions or at least petitions that are coming to General Conference, what they might be, and then how they might play out, and if they are passed, what that might mean for the Methodist Church and or a local congregation. So it's an information-only meeting. This is not a meeting that requires votes or anything like that. But, ma'am? Yeah, they're going to be both the same. It's the same information. It's just to reorient us, because you can follow General Conference if you want to. It's a live feed, and you can actually track any petition that's being, all that's available. But and the General Conference is April the 23rd through May 3rd, and it's in Charlotte this year. But these two Wednesday nights are just information only, so do want to make you aware of those. So, I mean, there are other announcements that'll be in the bulletin, but those are probably the ones that pertain to us, and then ones that are to our congregation. So, just FYI there. So, all right, good here. Can I erase it? All right. And then I've got some copies of the, you can call it a chapter if you want, a chapter on submission. If you would rather have a printed copy, I think Kathy sends out the e-version. So, and there's some are being printed as I'm speaking. So there's plenty of these that if you want one for next week, that those will be available. All right. Oh yeah. So you can pass these around. Just keep passing until. Let me make sure they're all. Whoop, no, these are not it. So let me go get some. How about that? So yeah. Hang on. Hey guys. The submissions. So what's going around is next week's material on the discipline of submission. I think it's like maybe 8 or 9 pages max. But today's we're going to do solitude. So we'll give it a second for Pam to pass out. And if you'd rather have an e-version, Kathy will send that out probably later today. So I'm assuming you're cold. It is not cold to me. It is on 70 degrees. So okay, but I can make it warmer. I'm happy to make it warmer. All right. Well, we'll see it break, and if it gets cold, we can. I mean, if you're cold, there's no reason to be cold. So I mean, we can make it warmer. So I see 2 people with jackets on. Yes. Who was right? All right. So there'll be extras if anybody needs one. So, all right. So let's pray, and then the prayer pad's right here. So we'll start this round. Oh God, as we gather in your name for this, we are grateful. As always, an opportunity to study and to learn and to be together. Whenever we are gathered, our hope and desire is twofold. One is that we want to learn, and so we're after not just a learning, but an applied sense of learning to where what we take in is applied to our life in such a way that it influences behavior, action, a lifestyle. At the same time, as we gather together, the bonds of friendships, we want those to be strengthened and encouraged and developed and deepened. And so we pray for these. At the same time, we pray for those places around the world that are in the middle of war and conflict. We pray for peace. We pray for health of people. And then for those that are part of us, at least this group, and those that are connected to us, even outside of this group, that either are in the hospital or grieving or facing surgeries, anything other than wholeness. What we pray for is wholeness, oh God, and we ask for you to guide us and direct us in all of this. And we pray this in your name. Amen. All right, so today, solitude. We have to go back a few weeks. That's next week. So what did you want today's stuff? Oh, okay. You get the That's right. You get the teacher's copy with all the notes. Oh, okay. All right. Is there others that need today's stuff? Okay. 1 minute. It will all be okay, I think. What's that? It is all right. Let's see what we got here as you get to look at all my emails. How many? 10? 2?
You want one, raise your hand.
So, all right, I'll do 15.
Everybody want one? If you don't want one, put your hand down.
All right.
If you don't want one, put your hand down.
All right. I've got 15 coming. How about that? All right. So we're good. All right. Thank you. All right. 1 minute. Let me make a phone call. How about that? It is. Saves me from walking. Hey, can you look at, I think it's the color copier, and there should be some chapters on the discipline of solitude. Can you bring those whenever they get finished? I mean, or at least when you get 10 or 12. Yeah, so even if they're not, I'm printing 15, but once you get a few, just maybe 8 to 10, go ahead and bring them. Yeah, it's all the same thing. I didn't staple them, but just clip them or something like that. All right, thanks. Bye. All right, we are moving in the right direction. These are the weeks to come, so that I would make sure I had the right weeks with the right subject. So give me 1 minute, so we'll be good. So y'all been following, this is a crazy question, the women's college NCAA tournament, and Caitlin Clark and Angel Reed. Boy, let me tell you, there's some good basketball players. So I was doing everything I could last night to stay awake to watch it. So. What are they playing? Oh. Yeah, so the best of bracket 10, right? So I mean, So my little brother and I sometimes play in a golf tournament here. It's a member guest tournament, and the hope is for us to not be in the last flight, but we're always in the last flight. It doesn't matter, and so I always tell them, I said, we have a chance to be the best of the worst. So so. Well, it all depends. They rotate, so it depends on, of the day, the flight that we would tell for. That's right. Yeah, you're correct. So all good. So let me at least start us this way, because then when we get this is not in the chapter on solitude. But I think one of the best examples in the Bible, outside of the ones that are mentioned in the chapter, is Elijah. And so Elijah has, the narratives that are tied to him go on for a number of chapters in 1 Kings. But in 1 Kings 18 and 19, I think this is just an excellent example of solitude. Because what you have, 18 is where Elijah runs into Obadiah, and Obadiah tells him that he's squirreled away some prophets. They're just hiding in caves away from Ahab. And then he has the second part of 18. There's what I mean by squirreling away the prophets. But from the second part of 18, really verses 20 through I think 40, the rest of the chapter or so, Elijah has the showdown with the prophets of Baal up on the mountain, and then as soon as that's over, and he sort of goes into a state of struggle, almost like a dark night, and he ends up. Hey, thanks. Okay. He ends up. This is today's stuff, so if you want some of today's, just take one pass by. He ends up running away, and really what he wants to do is he wants to die. And he sort of distanced himself from everybody, and he's alone. And it's there that he meets an angel, and the angel does two things for him. It makes him sleep, and he makes him eat. And he does that a couple of times. Because, and the line that goes with it, you need to sleep, you need to eat, because the journey that you're on, you need sustenance, you need energy. Eventually, so then we move into chapter 19, and then at the midpoint of chapter 19, it's where he's in a cave, and there's all these things that take place. It's like a tornado type experience, then it's like an earthquake type experience. And every time he thinks that's going to be where God is going to come and visit him. And it's not until all that passes and it's just utter silence, and he's also in a state of solitude, that he actually hears from God. And it's a whisper. And that is sort of restores him to then pass on the mantle to Elisha. So this, to me, is a perfect example of what we're going to talk about today with the concept of solitude. Now, last week we looked at simplicity. And simplicity is an inward state of being that has an outward behavior, all right? Similar to simplicity, solitude is an inner state of being that where the has more to do with the mind and the heart than it does a geographical space. Because one of the things that Richard Foster will do in the chapter is he will delineate the difference between solitude and loneliness. They're completely different. The only thing they have in common is that people are not around. And but solitude is a discipline to embrace that wants to create a sanctuary inside of your heart. All right, a place for God. And the reason why solitude is a good discipline to adopt and to practice is because it can create an opportunity for a person to mature, my terms, in their faith and mature in their state of being as a person. And the similarities with loneliness or the similarities with other disciplines is that it does involve not being with people. So your distance, thank you, away from. Does anybody else need some? We'll keep passing them around. All right. So what makes solitude so good, like some of these other disciplines, they're disciplines to be practiced for a period of time so that then when you re-engage differently. You re-engage as either a different state of being as a person, so all of this is an inward, what we call an inward discipline. Even though it involves outward behavior or outward things or interactions, the goal of solitude, like simplicity and even silence, is to create a certain type of sanctuary inside of the heart. And the reason why it's difficult for us to do this without solitude is because think about all the distractions that go on around you, either in things that you see or things that you hear. They're everywhere. And so how would you structure your life for a period of time so that those distractions are removed so that what you can focus on is this sanctuary inside of yourself or inside of your heart? That's the whole purpose of solitude. And again, it's a discipline that a person embraces for a period of time so that their inside changes, so that then they engage people around them, they engage differently. Henry Nouwen, so you might remember Some of, like, can you drink the cup? Remember we read that at the end of last year, or at least our time of last year about this time. Henry Nouwen was the writer of that. He practiced solitude all the time, and he would say it's impossible to live a spiritual life because without solitude, because in solitude we are freed from the bondage to people and inner compulsion. So the way Richard Foster would describe that about this bondage to people is how much of your life, action, energy, whatever it may be, how much of that is spent on either trying to impress other people or that your behavior is dictated by what someone else says or does. All right? So one of the things that solitude can create is that it creates a level of freedom because you're removing yourself from the distractions that you see or the distractions that you hear. For Henry Nouwen, these inner compulsions, they're all fear-based. And the way Richard Foster would describe them, it's our compulsion to want to control things. And the reason why we don't embrace solitude or even embrace silence is because when we do that, what we feel more than anything else is helpless. All right? So, case in point, some of you will go to lunch together after this, or maybe later on this week you might play bridge or whatever it may be. You'll be with some other folks. Try it out. Now, if you're going to lunch with the people in this room, that's not going to work because you're all going to be trying out the same thing. But if you're going to lunch with people that are not a part of this group, just don't say anything. And then sort of kind of pay attention to what's going on inside of you about a compulsion to want to talk. Right? So I think it's been a while since I've looked at this. I think the average person speaks either 30,000 words a day or 60,000. Yeah, they speak more. Yeah. So I didn't want to say that, but you were actually correct. I mean, men speak about half the amount of words that or the number of words that women speak. But I mean, what would it, so I mean, just pay attention to what goes on. Do you feel helpless, or do you have this sense of anxiety when there's just silence in the room, or when you are by yourself? So So if that's the case, that's not bad. It's not good or bad. It just is, okay? But one of the things that solitude can do is create inside of us, at least helps us look at the reason why we feel compelled to want to talk, or why we feel compelled to when we are by ourselves, to go and be with someone else, right? So those are always the great thing about what disciplines do is they help you dig under the surface of your life to at least see why we do what we do, right? Doesn't mean it's wrong, but if you don't know why we're doing it, then you cannot change whatever you want to change. You have to go to actually the headwaters of it. You have to find the source of it. And sometimes our need to talk and sometimes our resistance to be alone is because of something that we fear. If that's the case, then solitude can be helpful. All right? And again, solitude is something that we practice for a period of time so that when we re-engage differently. All right? It's not designed to be a permanent way of life. I mean, actually, that can be destructive for a person. That's been well documented. And this is where the monastics got it wrong. All right? So the monastics, you have the rise of monasticism in the 300s, and not everybody, but a number of people left the cities because they thought the faith was being watered down, and they ran out into the desert thinking that if they go to the desert, then somehow magically the faith is going to be renewed. But they never, some of them did, some of them didn't, but many of them didn't actually deal with the real root of the issues of their life. And what they discovered is that whether they're in the cities or in the desert, it's the same thing. Just the geography has changed. But to embrace solitude as a discipline can at least help us look at what's under the hood of our life, and then because then we can actually address those things with the Spirit of God. So what normally happens when someone embraces solitude for a period of time, one, they recharge their batteries. And what we mean by that, they're spiritual batteries, okay? And it can be your physical batteries, right? And at the same time, it is probably solitude with silence, they go hand in hand, are the best two disciplines that teach us how to listen. So it teaches us how to listen whenever we embrace this. Because if you're not talking, guess what you're doing? All right. Now there is the possibility of not talking and not listening at the same time, right? That does happen, right? So but normally there's an old proverb that says, "All those who open their mouths close their ears." All right. So I mean, I don't mean like a proverbs like in the book of Proverbs, but just like an old proverb itself. And there's some truth to that. Solitude can teach us to listen, because listening is actually harder than what most people think. Right? Now, you might hear something, but you're not listening, right? That early in my marriage, I was very, very guilty of that. And Brooke would say something, and I could repeat it verbatim, word for word, even if it was a long paragraph. But me hearing it and me actually listening to her, worlds apart. So listening requires energy. I mean, if for people to actively listen to another person, you will be tired, all right? Because you're not just hearing the words, you're also trying to understand what the person is actually, what the other person is saying. So when we do practice solitude, one, it helps us deal with what's under the hood, and perhaps our need to control, or the anxiety we feel when we feel like we're out of control or feel like we're helpless. And then at the same time, recharge our batteries, and it teaches us to listen. Now, what's great in the Gospels, and these are just, 5 examples of these two things, you see it in the life of Jesus, all right? Jesus practiced solitude probably more than anybody else in the Gospels. And these are just 5 examples. There are others. But these are stories. These are parts of the Gospels that we know. Obviously, the beginning of Matthew chapter 4, this is part of what we call his temptation. He's baptized. He hears from God, "You are my beloved Son." Notice the pronoun is you, not this is or he is. "You are my beloved Son." So the Father is speaking directly to the Son. And then it says right after that, the Spirit drove him out into the wilderness, or out into the desert, and he was there for 40 days in solitude. All right? Now, we also know that in those 40 days, he dealt with temptations. Matthew's Gospel records 3. There were more than 3. We just only have 3 that are mentioned. But it's after this part of this time of solitude that when he re-engages the world after his time in the desert, this is when he begins his ministry. All right? So solitude was practiced before the beginning of something that would eventually lead to death and resurrection. Luke 6, before he chose the 12. All right? So, big decision. There were other people that followed Jesus outside of the 12. Right? There are times in the Gospels where he sent out the 12, and there were times in the Gospel where he sent out the 70. And it talks about crowds following him. So there were other people. The 12 are just the intimate group. They're the close group. But before he chose the 12 from the crowd, or at least even from the 70, you could argue, he spent a time of solitude up on a mountain praying. Probably for guidance. Same thing, Matthew 14, after feeding the 5,000, he and his disciples said, come away with me for a period of time, for a period of renewal. And it was also a time that he taught them specifically. Transfiguration, he's up on a mountain with the inner 3, Peter, James, and John. They're in a time of solitude. They've left everybody else, even some of the other disciples. And obviously in the Transfiguration, that God visits him. Matthew 26, obviously we know for many we just read this past week in Holy Week, Garden of Gethsemane. So Jesus, and in all of these, prayer is another discipline that he's engaging in these times of solitude. And they're short term, it's a short term experience, so that when he engages, whatever it might be next, he engaged differently. Right? So all of these stories, this is not where the gospel ends. But this is always, this is before, almost like a prerequisite, before something greater took place. Right? So and that's where solitude can be very helpful because it creates this, or it can create this sanctuary inside of our heart, and at the same time, it's in these times that we're able to listen, even as difficult as it may be. It teaches us to listen. So one of the things that Foster what Foster said in the chapter is that solitude and silence go hand in hand. You almost need them both. And he does talk about the tongue. He references James chapter 3, says that the tongue is a thermometer. What does a thermometer do? Measures the temperature in the room. So it measures the temperature of what's going on inside of you. But it's also a thermostat, because what does a thermostat do? Regulates. So I think I've shared with y'all before, if you really want to learn, pay attention to really what's going on in your life, just record everything you say. Yeah, some of the faces are like, whoa, wait a minute. It's like, it's too deep for us, right? So, but I'm dead serious. Just to pay attention to your words. And they'll this is right, because you cannot lie when you know what you're saying. It will reveal the temperature inside of yourself and whether or not you're moving towards or moving away. Words are, they're powerful. They have the ability to destroy. They have the ability to build up and to create. And there's a reason why the book of James spent a great deal talking about the tongue. And it is the mechanism that whatever's in our head or whatever's in our heart, through the tongue, it will come out. So if you really are interested in what's going on inside of you, pay attention to your words. And I've often wondered what it would be like if like an alien came down and just followed us for a day or a week and saw what we did and listened to what we said. What would that reveal? It would be interesting. Scary too, right? So, yes, not something you want to share with other people, something for your own personal development. So does anybody practice, their retreats, like solitude retreats? I think there's a place in Atlanta. Isn't there like a Catholic place just outside of Fort Moore? What's it called? I think so. I've been there one time before. I know there's a place in Middle Georgia called Greenbow House of Prayer, which is really good and sort of rustic. But what you do, it's like being in a cloister area. You go for like a long weekend or whatever it may be, and you spend time in silence. You eat in silence. You worship sort of in silence. And I think you can only speak for like an hour a day or something. It's interesting. But I've got some friends who practice that live close by for them. So there are places to go if you're ever interested in this. I know there's. Yeah, so those who've been on the Emmaus Walk, actually the first night, it's you don't talk from that evening until morning, and which could be interesting. But it's the purpose, all right? It's the idea of that. So, has anybody ever tried to go through a day without talking? it'd be hard to do. I mean, but or to, not to get out with like a clicker, but to limit your words to, to half or to a third. I mean, just whenever someone engages you, you engage back, but that's it. Just or to, I mean, you can, I'm just curious if if anyone has embraced this for a period of time, what it can and what your experience was. But there are opportunities to do that if you're interested, and they can be worthwhile. Because the purpose, again, of all this, it's a temporary experience for a greater purpose. And the greater purpose is to create this sanctuary in our hearts, or the way Richard Foster would describe it, is to see and to hear things that you don't see and you can't hear because all the noise that is around you. So which is interesting to think about. Because if you look at the 1 Kings, one of the things that happens in Elijah's life is that, so he's on the mountain and he's having this contest with the prophets of Baal. I think you are familiar with the story. It basically says, you build an altar, I'll build an altar, and you can go first, and whichever deity lights the altar, receives the offering, that's the one we're going to follow. So at the end of the day, we're either going to follow Yahweh or we're going to follow Baal. And all the prophets, they go through and they do their incantations and everything, and nothing works. And so the whole time, Elijah's just watching, and then finally they give up, and they say, all right, it's your turn. So Elijah then wets his offering, or his altar, wets it a couple of different times. And then, of course, he prays, and as soon as the prayer is over, fire consumes the altar, and then, of course, then they end up killing all the prophets of Baal. But immediately after that, which is, I mean, you can think about what that would be like if you were Elijah. The level of energy, that one would spend in that whole engagement. And then Ahab and Jezebel, this is where it can kind of get dysfunctional for Elijah. They know where he is. He's on the mountain. I mean, so it's not like he's, in the CIA and has gone dark, right? I mean, they know where he's at. And Jezebel says, by the end of the day, you're going to be dead. And as soon as we find you. But you know where he's at. So he's threatened to die. And so he runs away. And what he believes is that he's the only faithful person. Now, what happened in the beginning of chapter 18? Who did he meet? Obadiah. Right? And Obadiah told him, what? Haven't you heard my Lord, that I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with water and with food. So he just met Obadiah on his way up to the mountain. Obadiah said, I got 100 people hiding in caves. And he talked to Obadiah, who is also a prophet. But Elijah, in the beginning of chapter 19, believes that he is the only one who is faithful. And so what he is, he's out of gas. And so he's not even, there's not a rational thought with him. And so he takes off running, and the whole time he's complaining to God about, I just wish you would kill me, which is the same thing that Moses did. I mean, there's a whole list of people who have done that after a huge spiritual event in their life where they're spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally exhausted because their batteries are on empty. And so he runs away and actually just hides out under a tree. And then the next thing you know, an angel appears, and so he thinks that the angel is going to give him this, this great bit of wisdom. And what the angel does, it bakes him a cake. Cakes always help everything, right? So, I mean, really bread. But bakes him, which bread also does, helps everything too. Connor's fiancée, Julia, she's a bread baker, and she made some rosemary bread for Easter. Oh, my word. It's like, come on in, honey, come on into the family. So, so the angel bakes him something to eat, and then he tells him to sleep. So he takes a long nap, wakes up again, prepares meal, tells him to sleep again, and then sends him on his journey. What he's doing, at least here, is he's recharging part of his batteries physically so that he can then engage God in moments of solitude or in a solitude experience. And what he does is he hears from God. And then, which, similar to Jesus, sets him up for the next development in his life, which is to pass the mantle from one to the next. So the purpose is to see and to hear. Now, he is alone right here, but it's not solitude. All right? I mean, he's not wanting to see, he's not wanting to hear, he's just running and hiding. But it's after an actual time of solitude where he's actively trying to create something inside of him, right? So that he can see from here from God. And that's exactly what he experiences here. So it is something that can be really, really good and can be really, really helpful. But like any discipline, it takes energy and it takes time. There are no quick fixes to the Christian life. All right? So there are no magic bullets. They don't exist. So when we talk about the growth of a person and the maturation, it takes time and energy. But the more we give ourselves to this in various ways, prayer, other disciplines, the effects, it does yield what it's supposed to yield. But it's just not done, overnight. Part of the growth of the Christian life is growth. I mean, no one grows from a baby to an adult in a day. It takes sometimes, decades and decades. Well, the same is true with us. So let me stop, open it up. Any questions, comments, and we might take a break and then get into how we might at least begin a life to some degree of solitude. Something, is this something, you don't have to raise your hand, something you want to engage, something that is no way, no how, never, just chew on it. Mm-hmm. Sure.
It's not something you have to do.
Right.
Other ways.
That's right. Yeah. So this is one. There's like 15. So of the disciplines in the church, there's about 15 of them. And so if you think about, all right, take the analogy of what you eat throughout a week. The odds are you're not going to eat the same meal 3 times a day, 7 days a week. Now, you might eat some of the same. It might be some sameness, maybe breakfast, or you might have the same dinner 2 or 3 nights a week. But all of it, all the food is designed is to give you nourishment, right? So when we talk about the disciplines that are available to us that we practice, there are some just by our habit we practice more than others. Right? Study, at least for during the school year. You come here for a portion of time to study. Some of you are in Sunday school, so you're studying there. Some of you have personal devotions, and you read the scriptures on a personal level. So you're practicing that discipline of study, and that's very common inside the life of the church. Same thing with prayers, right? I would imagine that at certain points during the day you are praying. Okay. It might be at different times or for people or whatever, but prayer is another discipline that you practice. Worship, obviously, is another one that you practice. So there are many disciplines that are available to us. Some of them by habit we practice more than others. What we're looking at least some of these, is what I call the lesser disciplines, not lesser in degree, but just lesser in the amount that people practice, and because they also can be helpful as well. But all of them are, particularly these lesser ones, they are things that we adopt just for a period of time, in hopes that from that it creates also a different yield. And from time to time, I would argue we need to do it. Okay, don't have to, but it's if you eat steak every meal, at some point you're going to have a problem when you go to when you go to the doctor. All right, it's just not good, right? At least that's what they're telling me. So so if you eat something else every time, right? So there needs to be a variety to some degree, because it can create, or take, like, some of you work out, you exercise, right? So why do you do multiple exercises? Because they engage what? They engage different muscles. That's exactly right. And so different disciplines over a period of time have the same effect. And, be careful not to see these in extremes, as if to say, okay, I'm going to embrace solitude, and so for the next 6 weeks, I'm not going to be around anybody. That's not it, all right? So, or I'm not going to talk for the next 2 days. No, that's not it either, right? So, but if you find yourself talking all day long, well, then take an hour that says, okay, for this hour, I'm going to be by myself, and I'm not going to talk. Maybe I'll go sit at the park, or maybe I'll be outside in my backyard, or whatever it may be, or maybe I'm going to cut off the TV and just have the silence in the house. And in those moments of silence, I'm going to pray. Now, it doesn't mean that, like a structured prayer. It's going to be, all right, God, I want to be available. So now come and visit. All right, that's fine. Solitude and silence. For someone, let's take a break, because we're going to get into how we might do this. So let's take a break for about 10 minutes, and we'll come back. No, I'm talking about all the, when I go, let me cut this thing off. Go ahead and come back to order. So when we talk about the difference between solitude and loneliness, I mean, loneliness is more of a inner emptiness. Solitude is more of an inner fulfillment. Both of them do involve that you are not with people. But solitude carries the idea that you are alone by choice. Loneliness is not necessarily by choice. So just a little bit of difference there. Again, it's about a state of mind and a state of heart. And so that's what the purpose, or at least the goal of the practice of this particular discipline. At least hopefully that's what we want for the yield. So it does involve silence, obviously, when you're alone. So let's think about how we might at least practice this to some degree, not all the time, but at just different times in our life. And in the chapter, Richard Foster does mention 3 possibilities as a way to at least begin this discipline, particularly if it's something that's foreign. And the first one is, he basically says, just start small, little solitudes. And it could be just for a certain period of the day. It could be in the mornings. It could be in the evenings. It could be a certain time, that you just set aside to say, okay, this is just going to be where I'm disengaging from the world around me. So no noise, no people. How can I just get away from all the things, the distractions that are around, and spend moments of listening. And in the beginning, it's going to be difficult because it might be a change of behavior, but over time, it could be something that is actually welcomed. How many of you watch the news all day long? Thank the Lord. Okay, thank the Lord. So because one little solitude could be, it's the same stuff, they just recycle, right? So watch one cycle, then cut it off, right? So, but that could be like a little solitude. And, for me, whenever I practice solitude, for me, it's very early in the morning. The temptation for me is to turn on the TV or turn on something that I hear noise. And I normally wake up before anybody else in the house. And it's even before I'll start reading the news or whatever it may be, just to have moments of just quiet, just solitude, where no one else is around and there's literally no noise in the house for 30 minutes to an hour. And it's not every morning, it's just some mornings. And normally it's how to quiet myself, that's my terms, and go through. I have just kind of a litany of prayer, different ways of praying. But it's not every morning. But what it does is it does help me sort of orient myself to the day, where I feel like I'm hitting the day on my front foot instead of being more reactive to the things that are around me. So what would it look like in your life if you embrace just a little solitude? All right. So, and it can be however you want to define that. But start small, just for a period of time, and then kind of move on to something else. He said those can be it. He said another place or another opportunity is to develop a quiet place where the place is like a place in your house, or if you like outdoors, a place outdoors, whatever it may be. But you know that when you're at that place, it is for a certain purpose. You kind of deem it, you name it, you sort of set it aside, you consecrate it for this is going to be the place where I go. That's where I'm going to engage God without distractions, right? So you might have, for some people, for instance, I've heard people like if they have like a little sunroom or a little outdoor area, sometimes that is their place. For some people, it might be, at the beach, it might be at the mountains or whatever it may be, but it's here you start, even though it's not necessarily a geographical place, you at least start there, all right? So whatever it is, that's going to be my place where I'm not going to, I'm just going to try to remove as many distractions, noise, things like that around me, so that for a period of time, it could be 10 minutes, 30 minutes, could be a long period of time, where I'm going to just engage God just for myself, right? I'm not praying for anybody else. It's just, all right, Lord, in these moments of silence and in these moments where I'm by myself, what can I learn about myself? How can I use this as an opportunity to grow deeper with you? So for some, it could be a certain place that you say, this is my time. There are a couple of St. Paul members that at different times in the year, they'll come up and just sit in the chapel. All right? And we know that when they're there, the chapel's open anytime. They just come and sit, and it's normally in the morning, and they just sit for a period of time. Sometimes it might be 10, 15 minutes. Sometimes it might be an hour for them, and then they just leave. So for them, that's their quiet place and a place for them. It's like a tiny mini retreat where the distractions are removed. And then the one that's hard for us all, talk less, listen more. So, if you talk 100,000 words a day, then, try 95. So, I used to have a friend, I don't know if y'all remember Brad Brady. Brad was a minister in our conference, and just a dear soul. He used to tell me all the time, said, early in my ministry, he said, Shane, if you cannot improve the silence in the room, don't say anything. And at first it was a little offensive to me. I was like, well, hang on, I've got a lot of wisdom up here, and so it's like, no, you don't. You're not the only one, and Bill Powell, so that was, some of y'all remember Bill. Bill's advice to me was at annual conference, let some other fool get up and go to the microphone. Typical Bill Powell way of describing it. That one time I wanted to go, and some of the conversation was just nuts. And he could tell I was getting ready to get up, and he just kind of put his hand on my, calm down, young man. And he said, just give it a minute. He said, some other fool is going to say exactly what you want to say, and just let them do it. And I thought, okay. So, yeah.
For a long time, when Bill was here, our family just came to church.
Right.
We didn't join him.
Sure.
We just came to Sunday school, came to church, we were here a lot. And one afternoon, he appeared at my front door. I said, oh gosh, come in. Glad to see you. He said, I just came to tell y'all it's time to join the church.
Yeah. Typical Bill Powell invitation, right? Yeah. So John Stephen, yeah. So Bill was real good to me and to John Stevens. Some of y'all know John, who's a good friend of mine. When we both started in Columbus, and my first time that I met Buddy Cooper was on the golf course, because Buddy would be Bill's partner, and that's before I knew Buddy could play golf, so he kind of like got a ringer, and so he would play. It would be the older guys versus the younger guys. And we would win every now and then, but most of the time we got toasted. And so one night he invited Brooke and me, and then John and Stephanie over to their house to eat dinner. And he presented us with a trophy that said perpetual runner-up. And so I was like, all right, Bill, it's on now, you know. So, I mean, so anyways, yeah, I have a lot of Bill Powell stories. But the idea of, so what would it look like for you to be proactive in really active listening, not just hearing, but actively listening to the people around you? That's a gift. Well, it is a gift, but it's also something that can be developed, right? So it's like walking. You learn to walk by walking, right? So because to listen does take so much out of the person that's trying to hear, trying to listen. So that could be a start to where, for instance, how many of us, I won't say you, right? That sounds accusatory. How many of us are forming what our rebuttal is going to be mid-sentence while the person is still talking? All right? That's not listening, all right? That's hearing, just not listening. So, what would it be to listen more? And so maybe one of the practice, we could put number 4 would be, I'm not going to give rebuttals, until everything is, to actually there's like 5 seconds of silence or something, and to actually listen to what's going on around more. Because I can be guilty of forming rebuttals. I'll confess, which is one of our disciplines, that it's easy for me, particularly if you're a fixer by nature, right? And you want to fix things or fix people, then what you're doing is you're forming your rebuttals without even listening to what's really being said. And I have to credit my daughter in helping me there, where she would say, "Dad, you're not listening to me." I was like, "Yeah, I am. I heard exactly what you said." She said, "No, you did not." Or even to ask questions so that you can listen more effectively, right? So instead of trying to form rebuttals. So. Well, so consider yourself blessed then, right? Yeah. So you're starting with the wind at your back, right? So I mean, so we live in a society now where forming rebuttals is a pandemic. All right, it's epidemic in how we have somewhere along the line we listen less and speak more. All right, so that's just a societal observation from my end. People can say I'm wrong, which is fine. But what I've observed in the way that we talk to each other is we talk at instead of to, and we form our rebuttals sometimes 3 words into their sentence, and we haven't even heard what they're saying. So particularly when our relationships are starting to kind of move in a less healthy or an unhealthy way, then what's happening, I would imagine, and you can test this if you know a counselor or someone who deals with relationships, normally what happens is people have stopped listening, and they're more concerned with talking than they are listening. I had a professor, it's a British Methodist, who would teach out at SMU, and he actually said something to me that at first I was like, I'm not sure that's right. And then the more I thought about it, I thought, this is brilliant. He said, listening is so close to loving, most people cannot tell the difference. All right, so just think about that.
Listening is so close
To loving, most people cannot tell the difference. And in the Middle Ages, the organ of your body that was the organ of obedience, do you know what it was or is? The ear. So, I mean, so maybe some of the ancient folks were right. So, I mean, there is something that's really, really good about listening. It just takes a lot of energy to do it. And at some point, we have to be comfortable with allowing someone else to speak, and which on one level doesn't sound like it would be that hard, but it actually can be. So, so when we practice solitude, what if you do practice this in any form, and it's new to you, expect for it to be difficult in the beginning, right? And expect you to get a little kind of antsy just when you're by yourself or when you're not talking. And one of the great prayers then is like, Lord, why am I so antsy now then? And it could be, it could be at some point maybe some of our fears start to come to the surface. Or it could be that what you really are more than anything else is just exhausted. And you're like Elijah, and you just need to just have your batteries recharged. And, Sabbath can be another discipline that is practiced. Sabbath is a gift that God gives to people so that people can understand again that they're not a thing, they're actually a person. All right? And because you're not a commodity. So what was the gift of Sabbath when the children of Israel were leaving Exodus? They worked 7 days a week. They were nothing more than just a piece of machinery. They were a commodity. And so part of the discipline of Sabbath is for them to understand again their connection to God and to find meaning there and not find meaning from their output or what they do. And so in our society, Sabbath can be, which is very similar to solitude and silence, can be very helpful because it helps form again who you are in Christ as a child of God, not in what you do. And unfortunately, in Western culture, and it's some degree in Eastern culture too, I'm just more familiar with Western culture, we pride ourselves and draw our identity on our production, how much we do. And so we live in this continual state of comparison and pecking order and hierarchy. And it has its value, but if it becomes destructive when we put more value on it than really what should be. So solitude and silence can actually help with creating a Sabbath experience so that what you do is you find yourself being renewed because frankly, we're just exhausted. All right? Particularly if you care for people or if you go and read these passages if you want just a little homework. The reason why Jesus embraced this idea of solitude before a big decision is because he wanted to be clear. He wanted to have clarity. And the reason why he embraced solitude after a major experience is so that he could recharge his batteries. This is well documented. Most political people who get in trouble, most athletes who get in trouble, and even people who get in trouble, it is after a major event in their life where they have given so much. And they don't take the adequate time for self-care, and so they're running on empty, and then they're more susceptible to temptation. All right? It is true for human nature. All right? The problem with just those that are in the limelight, everybody sees it, and it's well documented. But the same is true for us. So in these times of your life where you've just been going, well, part of what you're going to run into is you're going to become like Elijah. And so then the thoughts are not as rational as what they would be if you were well rested and cared for. The emotions are going to be, the threads are frayed and relationships get strained. So sometimes it's, your body too is crying out for, hey, I need something. And what I need is rest. And so that can be physical rest. Because you're connected. You cannot bifurcate your life and compartmentalize it to say, okay, physically I'm tired, but mentally I'm great, relationally I'm great, and spiritually I'm great, or relationally I'm tired, and all the others are great. No, you're all connected, and so whatever's going on in one aspect of your life, it will affect the other areas. It's impossible to wall off those periods, those aspects of your life, and expect for them not to be affected. And so in those periods of your life where you've been engaged in something, and it could be something even really, really good, right? It could be something that you did, maybe acts of service or whatever it may be, and you just find yourself exhausted. It's not selfish to embrace the Sabbath, to reconnect with who you are, and who you are is, according to the New Testament, even in the Old Testament as well, the identity that you have formed from God is the source that affects everything else. And if we try to form it from something else, production, work, service, whatever it may be, this is what now when it's talking about when we're kind of moving into these things more than anything else. So if that's the case, one possible discipline to embrace for a period of time is to have like an inward retreat for your own sense of health. If Jesus did it, whether he had to do it or he chose to do it, we'll never know, because the Gospels don't tell us. But he did it because he saw the value of it before, for moments, so that he could be crystal clear in knowing that a big event was coming, and then after a big event, so that he could restore himself because he had spent so much at that particular time. If anything, we're not Jesus. All right? So, if he had to do it, then I would imagine that we would need to as well. All right, final comments, thoughts, concerns? The dark night of the soul. So the dark night of the soul comes from a guy, I think in the 4th, 5th century, somewhere in that age group, John Christensen. And John, it was an experience that he had where he was very restless, and he couldn't put his finger on all the unrest and that was going on in his life. And similar to, say, something like Job, right? So Job had all these horrible experience and was dealing with the leftovers of all of that. And so dark night of the soul is what we use to describe a period of desert where it's the characteristics of that season is not, they're difficult, but it's also could be an opportunity so that it affords the possibility of a greater yield in your life once you kind of journey through it. And so how many of you have gone through what could be perceived, at least on the front end, as something very painful in your life, and then as you've kind of cycled through that and you got on the other end of it, you actually look back, and even though it was painful and difficult, there's a level of gratitude for all the learnings and development that took place inside of you. All right? You understand what I'm talking about? That, what he would say, is a dark night of the soul. It's not punishment. It's not, it's not pleasant, which is why many of us don't like it. But it's an opportunity for, I think somewhere the way he describes it, he likens it to a person who is sick, that's about to go into surgery, because the surgery promises to bring healing. All right? I think that's in one of the chapters. And he says when you go through that, when you get on the other end of that, obviously surgery is painful. At the same time, the rehab and the aftercare is painful. But you embrace the pain for a period of time because from that is greater health. All right? So think about that spiritually. Think about that inside of your life where you might go through something where you sense that maybe, at least on the front end, where are you, God? where are all the people, where are the people who are with me? And on the front end, it is very painful. But as you walk through that and you look back, you realize that there were so many things that you were learning along the way. And so when you get out of that valley, you're actually, for lack of better words, better. You're more, you've got a greater foundation that's been laid. That's a dark night of the soul. And John was the first one to coin that phrase. I want to say he's 4th or 5th century. Don't hold me to that. But he actually wrote extensively about the dark night of the soul. Mother Teresa, some of you have read some of her writings. Some of her, after her death, they published some of her journal entries. And she would write about, Lord, there are times where I don't sense you like I did previously. What's going on? Dark night of the soul. And while we're in it, it's difficult, right? Because you might feel alone. You might feel like the wind's constantly in your face. It can be very painful, very difficult. But then as you journey through, you can look back with appreciation. Grief can be a dark night of the soul, all right? So when you go through levels of grief, and normally what happens when we grieve is that we, obviously we're learning to live with the loss, which is painful, and time is helpful. It is not just. Time can be helpful, but just because time's there doesn't mean you're going to be out of it. All right. So, but as you cycle through just aspects of your life, and particularly that of the calendar, you learn to live without, and you come out of it. You're always to some level are grieving, but at least there's something developing inside the person to where they're just different, right, than what they were before the loss. And what you can learn, and I think sometimes can even be when you get on, as you journey through, say, grief, and this is where time can be helpful if you're actively grieving, right? So to look back and you can see all those things with greater appreciation, right, than maybe, say, before the loss. So for some, grief can be like a dark night of the soul. And they come, I think, actually, it's Helen, you must have been in my office early this morning paying attention to what I was writing. Hang on a second. This is because I quoted some of the stuff from Foster around the dark night of the soul. Give me one second as I find it. So Foster wrote this. So this is my writing. Some of it is going to be borrowed from Foster. There are times in life that seem like what others call the dark night of the soul. Though a difficult time for sure, but it's not something bad or destructive. On the contrary, it is an experience similar to when a sick person welcomes a surgery that promises greater health and well-being. It's not a time of punishment, but a time to delve deeper into a greater maturation of faith and being. The desert is not something to be feared because it affords us a chance to strip away all the distractions. The real struggle for us is that it is uncomfortable and even painful. Therefore, we jet only to miss the opportunity. The way Foster describes it is, when God lovingly draws us into a dark night of the soul, there is often a temptation to seek release from it and to blame everyone and everything for our inner dullness. The preacher is such a bore. The hymn singing is too weak. The worship service is too dull. We may begin to look around for another church or a new experience to give us those spiritual goosebumps. Foster would say, this is a serious mistake. Recognize the dark night for what it is. Be grateful that God is lovingly drawing you away from every distraction so that you can see Him clearly. Rather than chafing and fighting, become still and wait. Times of solitude and silence help create an inner sanctuary where God whispers to us. It is then we sense an intimacy with Him like no other. Sometimes that is the effect of a dark night of the soul. So they're not. So nobody wants a dark night of the soul, for lack of better words, because it's painful, and obviously it has a stimulus that it sometimes can seem like it comes out of the blue. All right? It's like the ground opens up and all of a sudden you realize you're being swallowed up. God is not distant from those places. All right? So what is great about the New Testament, and you see it in the Old Testament, but you really see it in the New Testament, in every experience of your life, the ease and the painful, God can be present and actually wants to be present in every aspect of it. And when life is difficult, then what's so hard is that we're dealing with no longer in a place of homeostasis, no longer in a place of rest, what we're comfortable with. And so we're pushed out into the deep end of something which involves change, but it's change not at our choosing. And that's why it's so difficult. And so we're reactive more than anything else. Part of what God wants to do in that experience is not necessarily remove you from it, but to be with you in the middle of it so that even in a state of unrest, you find rest. All right? Even in a place that is where you find that you're very reactive, you actually become settled. All right? Which is a possibility. You can be settled even in a painful experience. All right? But it takes work, and I would argue it takes the Spirit of God to help. So in that, you can learn something deeper about yourself and even learn something deeper about God that lays a stronger foundation as you journey and process through that painful experience. Never experienced it, so let me say that. Childbirth. It's not painful at all, is it? I don't know why Brooke was all crying about it. I mean, whatever. I was there. I saw it. I mean, so. But what happened? So, do what? That's exactly right. And it's almost once you go through the process, the moment of afterwards, and this is where I normally visit couples in the hospital, it's happy, happy, joy, joy. Well, thankfully I wasn't there in the process, which I'm glad. But I mean, so it's the same thing, right? So what happened? And nobody can prepare you for that experience. I don't care what class you take, all right? And no one, and at the same time, no one can prepare you for the experience afterwards either. But you are forever changed by that experience. There's no way to unwind that clock, right? Grant me a little bit of leeway. Dark night of the soul. All right? So, all right, next week, submission. All the good ones. And don't forget, if somebody wants to host, I'm taking, I'm receiving.